What is up? This is Josh from Lambda School. I'm going to be talking about how you can approach some of your first projects here and kind of the mindset that I have when I'm building a project. I think this helps. Maybe you have HTML skill or CSS skill or even some JavaScript skill, but you don't know how to start a project. So that's what this video is for, is to get started. So in this case, I'm going to be using an annotation tool, and that tool allows me to draw on the screen. Currently, I'm inside of VS Code and allows me to preview some JPEG images, so it's super handy. I can stay in one view. And I'm going to show you a little tip and trick that I like to do, some of the tips that I like to do when I build these layouts and some of the tricks of the trade here. And what I like to do is I like to just get some big old lines drawn around things that are kind of giving me a mental image of what I want to see on the screen. And I'm talking HTML code here. So in this case, I'd probably want like a nav tag here. Or I could use, because I'm going to use this as a navigation that could come down. Maybe I want to turn it into a fixed nav eventually. So I've got these really cool ideas here. I'm going to say, okay, this is going to be a nav. Then I'm going to draw another square. And I'm going to go, okay, this is going to be a header. I'm going to have a nice header here. I can use a heading tag, and I can get all my content inside of here. This stuff will probably be an H1. And then I can either use a button, or I can just do like a div and just have some content inside of there. And this is going to be an image tag. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of planning out my HTML with my design file. So you can see here that I'm basically saying, okay, this is going to be a nav, this is going to be a header, this is going to be an H1. And you start thinking that way. And then if you start thinking that way when you see design files, they won't be so intimidating anymore. Because initially, by not having any of these experiences or skills, breaking down a design file, it's really intimidating. I get that. So let's take some of the intimidation out, replace it with some simple HTML, and eventually CSS. So in this case, we have another div. We could come in here and say, okay, this would be like all these would be classes that I'll eventually name, but I got a div in here, and then I've got some content inside this div, right? So I've got content here and content here, and it looks like they're equivalent. So whatever it is, I'm going to figure out the width on those, and they're going to be the same width. And I've got a little tiny margin gutter here. So I can kind of identify these things now without even coding anything. Again, I've got an image tag, and then down here I've got another div containing my three text and header elements. So that'll be a lot easier for me to digest. Again, I've got some separation. And I've got my div again for my contact, and then I can either just do like a P tag or a footer down here to cover the copyright, just in case I get more designs in the future that might expand on that footer. It might be wise just to use a footer element. So I'm going to show you how to turn this kind of quick, silly sketch into reality. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to turn off the lines because it's too much for us, but I want you, when you're doing this, to keep your sketch. I usually just sketch it right on a physical notepad, like near my computer. I highly recommend you either get a notepad or a mini whiteboard to help you sketch these ideas out for you. Okay, so I'm going to use a cool feature inside of VS Code that allows me to visualize both sides. Both window panes, I should say. And in this case, I'll just shut down one, and I'm going to look at my HTML. And so this allows me to visualize my HTML, how I was doing before, and now I can actually use my code. So this is the exact file that you will receive, and you're basically given this content. All this content has been delivered to you, but you have to mark it up with HTML for it all to work. So in this case, going back to my original idea up here, when I was sketching things out, I talked about having a navigation. So I could say like nav. And within my nav, I could put my elements of my navigation. Now, let's say that you don't have a lot of experience in HTML and you're going, Josh, I would have not said nav. I would have said div, or I would have used an unordered list, or whatever you feel comfortable with. Guess what? That's just fine as you're learning. As you get into different agencies and companies, they will have more opinion and they will tell you what to do. But in this case, I recommend you do whatever you feel comfortable with. So if that's divs, then stick with divs. You don't need to go with navs. But I just want you to understand that while you're learning, get the job done first. get the thing working, and then you could go refactor and throw some opinion at it. But when you're trying to build something for the first time, especially when you're learning, there's huge value in just getting the thing to work. So in this case, I've got this div that used to be a nav, and I could even go so far as to put a class on it and say navigation, and then I could reference that class with my CSS. So in this case, you'll notice you've got a CSS folder, and it's referencing another file called index.css. Now, some people will call this style, main, whatever they have it. Make sure you read your reference and you'll find out what it's named. In our case, it's index.css. You'll notice there's a big old chunk of code at the top of this page. We will have discussed this in the guided demo, but if you did not remember that, this is just called a CSS reset. But also, I've provided some basic tools that are going to help you. Box sizing border box, which basically allows us to override the box model's default behavior, and we talked about that earlier. And then I'm giving you two font families. So Titilium Web is going to be our basic font, so all these font pieces over here. And then all of our heading fonts are going to be bangers with a backup of cursive. These are all from Google Fonts, and I've provided you both of these through these links here with family bangers, Titilium. So basically, you don't have to worry about font families right now. You just need to worry about coding. So in this case, now that we've got our index.html going with our navigation, I'm going to go ahead and use that nifty mirror feature again. Now, this might be a little too much because it's so tiny, but I think it gets the point across here, and that I want you to see how your HTML and CSS connect to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and reference my navigation by using my dot, which is syntax to reference my class, and say navigation. And this navigation, I could then say like color red just to see if it worked. And so in this case, I want to draw this relationship. So the way that these two files are talking to each other is through this link right here. So this is going out to this page and saying, hey, access this page. And then I'm linking back to this page by using my dot syntax here, which is referencing my class. So that is how I'm referencing and speaking to the files across this project. Now you might be going, oh, that's really cool, or yes, I know that already. I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt to go back and review the fundamentals once in a while. So in this case, we've got our navigation class. We're referencing it with our CSS, and away we go. So how could we speed this up? Well, by simply running through our HTML and trying to focus down on, so I'm just going to get rid of the CSS for a second, focus down on the structure. So navigation is just one piece, but then we've got this logo. Now, I want the logo to come with me because I could actually put this logo inside of a nav and have it be fixed and have it kind of follow you as you scroll, which I think would be really fun. But if we come down to innovation on demand, we've got another, we could say header. And notice how I wrote that and it kind of auto-completed. So if I just say div, notice how it says emit abbreviation. That is a really cool feature inside of VS Code and other IDEs. Okay, it's not just VS Code, but it's just one of the nice features that allows me, I can actually hit tab, watch this, tab, and it auto-completes the element for me, which is super handy. Also, you can type in class names. So I can say class-name, hit tab, look at that, automatically writes it out for me. That is so cool. So this is very helpful for speeding up your production as well. So in this case, we've got our header, and we're just going to go ahead and plop everything that I know to be inside of our header. Now, just remember that reference I wrote with my little sketch. So remember how I kind of built these lines here. So now what I'm doing is like this navigation is going here. This header piece is going here. And you can see how I'm starting to build my HTML markup. Now notice I'm not taking time to go and do all my CSS right now. I think there's a lot of value in just marking up your code first and then coming back and thinking about it with CSS. So in this case, maybe I have some section, and in this section content, I've got features and about. So I'm going to pop this inside of a section tag. If you don't know what a section tag is, don't worry about it right now, or go Google it and figure it out. Hey, look at that. VS Code has a little element right there. The section element represents a generic section of a document, blah, blah, blah. Pretty cool. So in this case, but if you're intimidated by that, I'd say just use divs for now while you're learning, and then re-up later when we refactor some of this stuff, because we will. So in this case, we've got our image file, which matches up nicely with our image. We scroll down, and again, let's have another section tag. And now you might be going, okay, Josh, now we've got 2 section tags, and if we tried to style one of them, it would style them all. And you are very astute for observing that. And so what we would probably want to do is put some classes on here and say, okay, class, and we'll say top content, and then maybe we'll have a class down here that would be like what bottom content. Keep it simple. Don't overthink these things. Don't try to be super smart with your naming right now. Just get this stuff built. In this case, we'll do another section. I bet you can guess what the class name would be. Contact. Makes sense to me. Makes sense to the next developer, which is key. You have to understand, think about the next developer when you write these things. And then I'll just have my semantic footer tag and just type in or put in my copyright. Great idea. So now at this point, I've got all my HTML kind of marked up, and I can minimize all these structures and kind of see and point back to my original vision. So just to round it all back together, I had like a div box up here. I had another header. I had a section, image tag, section, and then I had a footer tag down here. So we can kind of point to where we were building those things. You see how these all match up? How cool that is. So this is how I like to build things, so I don't get lost when I'm trying to get a design file. So hopefully this helps you get a game plan together, and you can get this done very quickly. HTML, don't spend a ton of time right now stressing about your HTML structure. Just get it in a place that's going to make sense to you. Now, one little tiny note on that is I see constantly with new developers a disease called divitis. So basically, I will see people put a div around literally everything. So it'll be like div. In this case, they'll put a div around features, and then they'll put a div around this content, and then so on. They'll put a div on everything. So div, and then this will be another div. And it's fine in some cases when you need to have that extra control, but I would challenge you to use the least amount of divs as possible and try to think about, okay, why am I really actually wrapping this in a div? And of course, the answer would be, well, I have to control it with like box model, for example. And that would be a valid excuse. But I just want you to think about these things. Think about your div structures and try to keep it super simple, just as a courtesy to yourself, so you don't have a million div tags you're trying to fight. Okay, that is how you set up a project. It's how I think about setting up a project. I really hope it helped you. Talk to you later.